Welcome to Indiana Newsdesk. I'm Joe Wren. Well, this year's session at the Indiana State House wrapped up this week, and Hoosiers now know what the state budget will look like for the next 2 years. As Brandon Smith reports, it boosts funding for education, but schools with declining enrollment will still lose money.
Lawmakers are increasing the base amount schools receive for each student they enroll by about $350 over the biennium. Democrats, like Representative Greg Porter, pushed back on the deal, saying it still doesn't include money for teacher raises. But one of the state's lead budget writers, Representative Todd Houston, says school funding accounted for more than 70% of the new money in the budget. And to do it, he says, members had to compromise. The budget does add $7.5 million more to the state's fund for highly effective teacher bonuses. It also includes $3 million of new money per year to train teachers in computer science and another $5 million for English language learners each year. Democratic Senator Karen Talion says Republicans could have spent more on teacher pay, health care, pre-K education, and water infrastructure, among other things.
We do not need a surplus in excess of $2 billion.
But Republican leaders like Houston say the state's reserves help ensure Indiana can survive an inevitable downturn in the economy. The measure passed largely along party lines. Only one Democrat in either chamber, South Bend Senator David Niskotsky, voted for the budget.
And in a busy final week, lawmakers debated more than just the budget. Brandon joins us now to talk about the other big changes lawmakers made this session. First, Brandon, I just wanted to ask you about what we just heard Senator Talion said there in the story. Where does the $2 billion surplus number come from?
Well, Republicans, since they've been writing the state budget the last few cycles, have wanted to keep that reserve number around $2 billion. It does change by hundreds of millions of dollars from year to year, but fundamentally it's about maintaining a AAA credit rating with credit rating agencies. That's something that helps both state government and local governments with bonds and things like that. But in this budget, they actually held back more money than they need to maintain that AAA rating, and that's because there's some fears of a looming economic downturn.
Brandon, one of the big budget priorities this year was to increase teacher pay. So how much more money is going into education, and how will that money get spent?
Well, the state's $539 million boost in tuition support doesn't all just go to traditional public schools because the money follows the student. So it gets split between traditional publics and charter schools, voucher schools, and virtual schools. So while traditional public districts will get a 2% funding increase on average over the next 2 years, charter schools will get about 9%, and voucher schools will actually get a 10% funding increase.
Let's talk about that major gambling legislation passed this session. Briefly, what will that do, and what will it mean for folks in Indiana?
Well, one lawmaker who's a critic of the bill described it as throwing a grenade into the middle of the state's gambling industry. So it does a few things. The biggest are it clears the path for 2 new casinos in the state of Indiana, the first in a decade, one in one in Gary and one in Terre Haute. Another thing it does is it legalizes sports betting statewide, and that includes online and mobile sports wagering. And then it also says the state's 2 racetrack casinos can add live dealers to their table games beginning January of 2020.
So now, following an incident last fall, lawmakers tackled bus safety. What does this new language do to protect kids getting off buses?
Well, what it's really focused on is penalizing drivers who recklessly pass school buses. It increases the penalties for those drivers, especially if they injure or kill someone. In that case, they would now be facing felony charges, whereas previous law had those only as misdemeanors. It also provided a path for schools to pay for cameras on the school bus stop arms to help catch those drivers. Now schools can go to their local governments to petition them to get money for those.
And very quickly, lawmakers also looked at the state's Stand Your Ground law and some gun regulations. What did lawmakers decide there?
Well, the existing Stand Your Ground law says you can't be held criminally liable if you use force to defend yourself, your property, or someone else. The bill extended that to civil court. And then the gun regulations, current law says a school decides whether people can carry guns into church if that church is on school property. Now, the property owner will make that decision, whether that's the school or the church.
All right, Brandon, thank you very much, and thanks for your coverage.
Thank you, Joe.